Hello everybody, my name is Richard Petrie and I'm joined by Jayco. Today we're going to talk to you a little bit about an analysis we did on a data set provided by Lending Club. For those of you who don't know, Lending Club is kind of a peer-to-peer loan sponsor, and we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. So, today we're going to talk mainly about a core question of who is repaying their loans. However, that is quite a large question to ask, and considering this data set contains almost 900,000 records of various customers the Lending Club has had over the years, there's a lot of data to look through. So instead we break this down to a couple of smaller tasks, and we try to figure out how do we answer this question. And we start with some data visualizations, and then we move on to a machine learning algorithm, and that provides us with a couple suggestions for the company. So, as I said, Lending Club is a peer-to-peer loan provider, which means they're not actually providing their money. They're hooking up people who are applying for loans and people who want to invest money. So why do they care? Their money's not in the game, if you will. However, they are still a financial organization. They depend on their customers being confident that Lending Club has done the due diligence in figuring out if somebody will repay their loan or not. Lending Club does not want to be known as a platform where people go and just get free money because they get loans and never pay them. So Lending Club, despite not playing with their own money, still has that same obligation to figure out whether people are going to pay on time or pay at all. And so that becomes kind of the core aspect of this analysis.
So how can we find out? The first, we can look for one person by one person or one transaction by another transaction. But we have almost a million data sets, so it will take forever if we do one by one. So let's do smart way. First, this dataset is from the Kaggle.com. It's called the Lending Club loan data. There are 61 factors, columns, including loan status, grade, interest rate, and loan amount, or employment length, or something more. Let's see this visualized data set. First graph shows the employment length and then how many times they borrow. As you see this graph, the longer you're working, the higher amount you borrow. As you see in this graph, most of the borrowers working 10 years or more than 10 years, so we can easily assume that borrowers older than 30s because people usually start working when they are 20s. The second graph shows the loan amount and loan status. Fairly all status similar amount, but paid late has highest amount late. We assume that the Lending Club is a young company. I think they are still ongoing debts. And then third and last paragraph, as you see there, grade G borrows the loans the most amount. And then the lower grade, and then of course they pay the higher interest rate because they do not have a higher grade, they do not have a high credit. But they pay almost 26% of their loans. It makes them really difficult to pay back. So we assume that it makes their grade even lower. And we also conducted a correlation analysis, and then we barely see any noticeable correlations between loan status and other factors. So we decided to conducting the t-test with some columns that we picked with loan status factor. As you see here, we set a multiple null hypothesis that there is no correlations between grade and loan status, between term and loan status, between interest rate and loan status. First null hypothesis is there's no correlations between the grade and loan status, and then like we got a like almost zero p-value, it indicates we need other analysis, and then same as other hypothesis.
So we still need to answer that core question of who is paying their loans and who is not. And we could even see this as we're going to predict the future. However, we don't have a crystal ball here. Instead, we have a machine learning algorithm, which is going to look at this entire data set, and it is going to try to spot patterns that may be really hard for a human to see, and it's able to look at the entire data set at once. So the first classification we decided to do was a 6-way multi-classification. We have 2 categories of borrowers being late on their payments from 16 to 30 days, and a second category for 30 to 100 days, or 120 days, excuse me. Secondly, we have 2 more categories for debt that is charged off. This is debt that we are no longer even expecting to be repaid, and we are pretty much just saying they got away. We put it on their credit report, and we've sold the debt to somebody else usually. And then there's another category in default, which is typically they're still late past that 120 days, but we haven't entirely charged it off yet. And finally, the last 2 categories are good categories. Either people are current or fully paid off. The good thing is that for Lending Club is that the current and fully paid off makes up more than 90% of all the records that we have. I think the total is almost 780,000 out of our 840,000 records. We are heavily skewed, and our data set is incredibly imbalanced. So using standard statistics or machine learning techniques of just splitting the data set into 2 categories of, let's take almost 70% of it and use it as a training to train the machine learning algorithm, and then 30% to test its accuracy, we get a not great 64% accuracy. And basically what this is saying is that it is pretty much just putting most people into that current and fully paid off category, but it's not sure which one to put them in, so it's just kind of putting them somewhere and hoping for the best. This is barely better than flipping a coin. However, we looked into a technique called one-sided undersampling. An undersampling technique called one-sided selection. And basically what this does is that it only picks about the same number of current and fully paid off as there is everything else, and uses that to train the algorithm, looking at a balanced data set. And this showed massively better results at almost 89% accuracy, which, considering we're asking it to classify it into 6 different categories, is actually pretty extreme, and we're quite happy with this result. However, we also wanted to look at one more thing, is that we wanted to see only outstanding loans. So we dropped all the loans that were charged off. As we said, we're not expecting those to be paid back. We don't care about them anymore. Additionally, we dropped loans that are already paid off to fully paid off category, which again, it doesn't help us moving forward. We already have that money. It's done. We don't care about it anymore. So we are left with only 3 categories. We combine the 2 late categories into a single one. Then we have the current people that are up to date on their payments, and finally loans that are in default, which are likely to be lost. And we gave this to an algorithm, and it actually did a pretty good job. By pure accuracy percentage, it was 98.5% accurate. But as you can see, we're still heavily imbalanced with 601,000 records that are current, and a combined total of 15,000 records that are not. And so 97.5% of that accuracy is just placing current payments as the current category. If you said every borrower was current and up to date on your products, you'd still be more than 97% accurate. So we have to be careful with how we look at this. So this is what they call a confusion matrix, which shows the number of correct guesses or predictions in black, and the number of errors or misplaced people in red. The way you read this is the columns are what we guessed, while the rows are what has happened. So in this example, we guessed 7,954 records are current when they were actually late. So that's not just by the people that are non-current, we're about 45% accurate here. However, some really good things to note from this is that everybody we said was in default was in default. And we only used information available at the time that the customer applied for the loan. So this would actually allow Lending Club to look at this and say, if this algorithm says that somebody is going to default on their loans, we have a very high degree of confidence that they will default. Similarly, in the late category, there were only 2 errors in more than 5,900 guessed people that would be late, or late predictions. With only 2 errors, we can again say Lending Club could use this data and very accurately predict who is unlikely to pay their loans on time. And I think that's all we have for you today.